Alrighty, here are 10 tips for photo manipulation and photo editing. However, I only came up with 5 of these tips. I've called in PIX Cores, an excellent channel that I have learned a lot from personally over the last few months, to come in and give 5 of his own tips. So, 10 tips from the both of us, free for the taking.
This is a great tip for people who are new to photo manipulation because starting with complex photo manipulation will make it very hard to get it right, and it can even be demotivating when your creation doesn't look good, so starting with simple stuff will help you understand the most basic part of photo manipulation. For example, you may learn how to blend images, create highlights, and do other simple things to improve the look of your photo manipulation.
No invisible helicopters. Have a subject for your composition. Making really detailed backgrounds and landscapes is great. However, if it doesn't have a subject, it won't be a compelling composition. I know one guy who calls this the invisible helicopter. This comes from the idea that you may have made a really cool background, but if there isn't a subject, then it's like you have taken a picture of an invisible helicopter. It might make a nice picture, but what am I supposed to be looking at? Now, there is a caveat to this. You don't need a subject if your goal is just to work on backgrounds, cityscapes, etc., 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 because those do not typically have subjects. However, when in doubt, focus your image on an object or person.
Clipping masks are certainly something you've heard of if you've ever watched Photoshop tutorials or photo manipulation videos. It's a feature that allows you to restrict your preferred layer to any layer. In many of my photo manipulation videos, I have used this technique, but to use this technique in GIMP, all you have to do is put all the layers inside a layer group and make sure that your effect layers are on top of your main subject layer.
Learn the tools as you go. You don't need to know them all to start making stuff. You don't need to take courses or watch hours of basic tutorials before you can start. Just hop right in with the tools you do know. If you run into something you don't know how to do, find a specific tutorial for it. Once you have a basic understanding of all the tools, you will be able to work on your projects without referring to any tutorials at all.
Matching blacks in GIMP can be tricky and destructive, but this tip is simple to learn and non-destructive. To match the blacks, create a new layer. With Color Picker tool, pick the blacks of your background. Fill the sampled color in the new layer. Set the blending mode to lighten only. If you want to limit the effect on the subject layer, create a layer group and place the subject layer and the effect layer in it, making sure that the subject layer is at the bottom of the layer group.
Name your layers. If you are getting deep into photo manipulation, you might find out that you are working with a lot of layers. So if you are planning on working on a project with more than 7 or so layers, go ahead and take the time to name them. If you are working with a ton of layers, go ahead and use layer groups and color tags to aid navigation. You may not need to know what the layers are now when you know what everything is, but if you ever decide to reopen an old project, named and color tagged layers are a lifesaver.
This is a series of blending modes that are highly crucial for creating highlights and glows, but they don't always function well by default. This doesn't mean that these blending modes are useless, but rather that if you know this technique, you will use these blending modes all the time. To properly use these blending modes, create a new layer. Fill it with black. Then change the blending mode to these blending modes. When you paint something in that layer, everything appears to work perfectly. This method is also excellent for creating highlights, glows, and ambient lighting.
Name all your XCF files and keep them in a place where you can find them. When you begin a new project, save the file to a location you will be able to find it again. When you save the file, give your project a distinct name. Is not a name. There are two popular ways of organizing files. The first way is to have a folder labeled GIMP or XCF files or whatever you want to call it, and stick all of the XCF files that you ever make into it. Another way to do it is to save your XCF file in the folder that holds all your other assets that you might be using for that particular project, like stock photos, stock video, anything. That way, when in a few years, if you are looking for the project, you will be able to find it without opening every single file you have ever created. And trust me, there will be a lot of files.
This is a simple tip, but it can help you speed up your image manipulation in GIMP because you may need to make a selection around your layer during photo manipulation. To make a selection around a layer, Alt-click on the layer's thumbnail. After this, pixels will be fully selected, transparent pixels will be unselected, and translucent pixels will be partially selected.
Watch your layer edges. In a composition where you are using a lot of layers, you will often find that the edge of some of your layers are inside of your canvas boundaries. Be sure that you aren't leaving any straight lines from the edges of layers. This is especially true if you are working with overlays that have white layer masks applied to them. If you are working with a layer mask, use a transparency to black gradient on the edges of the mask to blend in the edges. Or you could just save yourself the trouble and use a black layer mask to start with.